for the 3 p.m. Presentations. We have two presentations, both in person. Just again, we're going to be splitting this round of questions with 7.5 minutes starting to the government, then following by the official opposition with 7.5, and then with the independent member with 4.5. So you have 7 minutes. The first presentation from from the Centre for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, CMHA Ontario. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself for the purpose of Hansard? And the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present our perspective on Bill 166, Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024. My name is Maria Pajan, and I'm the Director for the Centre for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. I also serve as the Chief Clinical Officer of the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario Division. I'm joined today by my colleague, Camille Kenville, CMHA Ontario's CEO. The Centre for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, or CICMH, is a unique partnership between Colleges Ontario, the Council of Ontario Universities, the College Student Alliance, the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, and the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario Division. Our position provides us with an understanding of not only the state of mental health on campuses, but across community mental health in general in Ontario. We are passionately committed to engaging and supporting Ontario colleges and universities in their commitment to student mental health and well-being. We thank the Ministry of Colleges and Universities for our funding, and in particular their renewed 3-year commitment to us. This allows us stability as we continue to provide vital resources and support to Ontario's post-secondary sector. A recent report from the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations found that 3/4 of students reported experiencing negative mental health in their studies. Indigenous students, younger students, students with lower income, students identifying as 2S LGBTQ+, and those living with pre-existing mental health concerns were most at risk. The cost of properly caring for post-secondary students' mental health and well-being is a growing concern for both post-secondary and community sectors. We acknowledge the importance of mental health strategies in providing a high-level roadmap for care. The lack of stable and sufficient provincial funding to both properly create such policies and, more importantly, execute them will function as a further barrier. For campuses that already have a policy in hand, the issue is the acute need for stable and ongoing funding for the work that must be done to put policies into action. A further concern is that the creation of mental health policies based on red tape requirement with no funding will consume resources and provide no real value to campus well-being. The recent Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario report highlights several structural and systemic forces that make it challenging for institutions to implement programs, hire staff, and plan comprehensively for the long term. These challenges include short spending periods and one-time competitive grants, which impede sustainable strategies for enhancing student mental health and impact staff retention. Addressing student mental health and well-being requires a comprehensive community-level approach transcending beyond the confines of clinical practice. It involves creating a supportive environment where students feel valued and understood, with access to resources and support systems that extend into the fabric of the community. In recent years, through our Campus Community Project, CICMH has made efforts to provide a continuity of care through bridging services when students transition into the community. However, being part of CMHA Ontario also makes us keenly aware of the challenges the community sector has in delivering service with current resourcing. When it comes to policies and rules on racism and hate, the principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism are firmly woven into the work of CICMH. In the past few years, we have developed several resources on anti-oppressive practice, supporting 2S LGBTQ+ students, and to address the growing rise of racism within the province. In fact, our anti-oppressive toolkit has been our most viewed resource in the past year. It includes information on approaches such as the intersectionality-based policy analysis framework to analyze current and new campus policies. We passionately believe that campuses need to create safe learning, teaching, and working environments for students, staff, faculty, as well as to address hate speech, harassment, and discrimination. Many campuses have already developed policies and procedures that are significantly broader than the areas covered in Bill 166 and comply with legal and statutory obligations. We feel strongly that campuses need to continue to work to foster environments that are free of discrimination, bias, and harassment, and that institutions should promote civil and constructive dialogue on campus. Furthermore, cultural safety should be integrated into mental health services across the province. As the Government of Ontario implements policies and regulations related to Bill 166, CICMH recommends 1. Increase long-term and stable government funding for student mental health supports, particularly at a time when post-secondary institutions are facing significant financial instability and are being asked to drive efficiencies. 2. Help fund current initiatives and student services in place to address hate speech, harassment, and discrimination. 3. Enhance the core set of community-based, culturally safe mental health and addiction supports across Ontario that individuals can access throughout their lifespan, including throughout their post-secondary journey. 4. Allow flexibility in how institutions use funds to ensure they respond in the most effective and efficient way to the needs of their unique student base. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Our second presentation is Mr. Fred Hahn from the Canadian Union of Public Employees. Mr. Hahn, if you want to come forward, state your name for the purposes of Hansard. You have 7 minutes, and then following your address, both of you will receive questions from the members of Provincial Parliament. Mr. Hahn, the floor is yours.
Thanks for that. My name is Fred Hahn. I'm the president of CUPE Ontario. The Canadian Union of Public Employees is the province's largest union. We have 290,000 members in Ontario. That includes 30,000 who work in the university sector. On behalf of our union, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak to you on Bill 166 today. The bill's name is rather benign sounding, Strengthening Accountability and Student Support Act, but it doesn't clearly articulate some of the concerns that we have about what the bill is actually going to do. We believe Bill 166 carries with it political aims of the current government and focuses them on our universities and colleges. Under the guise of protecting students, the bill would dictate to colleges and universities, stifle intellectual freedom, and threaten traditions of academic independence in our higher education sector. Anywhere else in the world, we'd call this legislation, like Bill 166, an assault on free speech, on the independence of the institutes of higher learning. In fact, Bill 166 sets up colleges and universities for a degree of political interference that we've never seen in our post-secondary institutions. Perhaps the most alarming change is that it enshrines a minister's ability to issue directives related to racism and hate on Ontario's campuses. This allows the government to infringe upon universities and colleges' own anti-racism and anti-hate policies, and on free speech and academic freedom on campus. Universities were originally given self-governance to stop this kind of political interference in day-to-day affairs. Academic and operational policies are matters for boards of governors and academic senators. This bill opens the door to unprecedented intrusion on that self-governance. The language of Bill 166 enshrines the Minister of Colleges and Universities to determine definitions related to racism and hate, including what constitutes anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. Ministerial directives could be used to impose the inclusion of any topic or element into rules or policies dealing with combating hate and racism. It has troubling implications in light of the current debate, particularly around anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, and freedom of speech on Ontario campuses. Bill 166 opens the door to the imposition of the controversial definition of anti-Semitism, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA. CUPE Ontario has made no secret that our union objects with this definition, but in fact, more than 100 different Israeli and international civil society groups join us in doing the same. We view this definition as a limit of freedom of expression and limiting the ability to criticize the State of Israel. For its part, the Ford government has adopted the IHRA definition through an order in council in 2020, but I think we might all agree so much has changed since then. Under Bill 166, the Minister of Colleges and Universities could impose the IHRA definition to silence on-campus pro-Palestinian groups and activities, or anyone who supports the right of Palestinians to self-determination, or who challenges Zionism as an ideology. Given the Ford's government track record of undemocratic practices and secret deals, we're very concerned with the underlying objectives of Bill 166. Another criticism of the bill centers around its overly broad usage of the word hate. Unless the intention is to stifle freedom of expression in higher education, it would be far better to base definition of hate and racism in our current human rights legislation frameworks to minimize any subjective framing. Our existing human rights bodies should determine the threshold of whether or not hate has occurred, not directives imposed by ministers carrying out the political will of any party. In the rare instances where a college or university doesn't have a policy, the policy of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the regulations of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, always apply. From a union's perspective, enshrining ministerial directives in legislation would allow a government to dictate the content of workplace policy. Bill 166 creates a distraction in labor relations and arguably interferes with the ability of the parties to freely negotiate. What then does this bill achieve at the cost of eroding independent governance and labor relations? It only succeeds in an overreach by government to apply the current political values or create an environment where any government could impose their political values to create wedge issues. Regarding the bill's requirement for every college and university to have a student mental health policy, I'd like to point out that most of the province's 47 post-secondary institutions already dedicate substantial resources to addressing the issues of mental health and racism. The best initiatives were developed collaboratively over years in response to on-campus needs, and thanks to the work and dedication of administrators, faculty, students, and unions. We look at the internal process at the University of Toronto, for example, in 2021, when it accepted recommendations from its anti-Semitism working group as an excellent example of what collaboration and listening can achieve. Rather than having the minister impose their own initiatives, the government should work to ensure success of existing policies that address mental health, racism, and hate. It should ensure that such policies are generated by using institutions with meaningful consultation of students, unions, and associations. And finally, if our government really cared about mental health and equality, it would put real resources into solving these problems, rather than trying to micromanage workplace policy. It would end the affordability crisis for students, the fiscal crisis in post-secondary institutions. Bill 166 does none of that. Absent from additional funding, the current fiscal constraints on post-secondary institutions
You've got about 1 minute remaining.
make it difficult, if not impossible, to effectively implement any real change. So with all of that, we'd ask that the government consider withdrawing the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to our first round of questioning. We'll start with the 7.5 minute round to the government. MPP Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Speaker. This question is directed, first of all, thank you everyone for being here today. This question is directed to Mr. Hahn. So I think we can all agree in this room that students, parents, grandparents work very hard to send our students to school. I'm saying this as a parent of children in post-secondary. Given these sacrifices, do you believe an organization or a representative of that organization has the right to communicate to their faculty, that being the teacher's assistants, graduate assistants, part-time library assistants, a direction to divert teaching to another curriculum, abandon lesson plans, and say, teach another issue that has nothing to do with their course selection? Once again, keep in mind that they go through terrible sacrifice to be there, and then they get to class and they're advised that they're not going to be learning that. Should this be allowed in classrooms? Should representatives, faculty, be allowed to walk into the classroom when they're dealing with a math study program, a nursing study program, and a computer study program, and the teacher or the instructor is not doing that and they're focused on something else? Should they be allowed to do that?
Thanks for your question. I am not aware of the specifics of what you're talking about. What I would want to do is agree with you that parents and families and young people go to great lengths to achieve the ability to attend post-secondary institutions, that the current government is doing little to actually help to alleviate the growing cost of tuition. You've capped tuition. The challenge becomes the financial squeeze this puts on the institutions. There's no question that the way in which courses are conducted in institutions of higher learning should, in our view, be left up to the departments and the folks on the ground of those institutions. With all due respect to you and me, I am not involved in those things, and neither are you. For any government to imagine that it could exact its own opinion and therefore direct what should happen at a university is, I think, a mistake. It belies the very idea of academic freedom, of ensuring that institutions have the independence and the autonomy to make sure that that the people at those institutions are actually, putting together curriculums and experiences and opportunities for young people to think broadly about all of the issues that we are all dealing with in our world. I think there's lots of important work for ministers of government and for MPPs to be doing. There are lots of important things for those of us in the union movement to be doing. I think there are real people who are in charge of this already, and that this bill represents a level of interference the likes of which we've never seen in our province's history.
But I think you would agree, if a student is walking into class to learn of nursing, of computer studies, and they've paid to do that, and their parents have sacrificed, and they have sacrificed, they've probably taken a job over the summer to cover for that, and they're not able to do that. Do you believe the faculty should be able to go against that sort of direction? Do you think the faculty organizations should remain impartial when it comes to these sorts of issues?
I think that if we're going to talk about nursing as an example, it would be key in the instruction of future nurses to talk about the impact of white supremacy and racism, to talk about the impact of discrimination and the way in which it plays out, particularly in the healthcare system. I would think that should already be a part of the curriculum, and as I understand it, having heard little bits and pieces from various faculty folks and even on the CBC, this is in fact increasingly part of the way in which our academic institutions are grappling with things like the colonial history of Canada, the anti-Black racism
If my child is walking into a computer studies program, I want them to get a computer studies program. I don't want them to get anything else.
No, agreed. And I think that the challenge becomes imagining that any course of any kind of study that doesn't talk about the ways in which discrimination wraps their way into all of the different systems, including computer science.
I think that would be left for the humanities, though, would you not? There are a whole host of other host of other courses where those children, sorry, I'm old, so I'm always referring to them as children, where students can get these humanities and get that interaction. I appreciate that. I'm going to pass my time over to MPP Nolan Quinn.
MPP Quinn.
Chair. So my question is for Ms. Padgen from CMHA, Ontario. Do you believe setting a baseline for mental health services and resources available to students is a strong step forward in supporting students at colleges and universities across the province?
So I think it depends on how we define that baseline. So I think in terms of, on paper that appears great, but what does that actually look like at individual institutions when we're comparing apples to oranges is where there's sometimes a deeper need to look at the context, meaning a school the size of Northern College and the school the size of U of T, the baseline is going to look very different, because what they have accessible to them is going to look very different, including what's going on in the community around them.
Can you explain the importance of why we should be informing the students of resources to help with their mental health and physical health when they first arrive at the school, and not after giving them a list of supports that they can work with?
I would argue that even before they enter that school, they should be given that information. And in fact, most schools are doing that. So many schools, as students are actually going through even choosing the school, it's quite clear what they have access to. And I know this both in terms of my work and as my child is about to start post-secondary. So that process becomes even before they enter, and it's repeated throughout. So one of the things that we're seeing is throughout their 2 to 4 years, it's repeated to them a number of times.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
MPP Pang, you've got about a minute.
Sorry, this one is for Cesar again. So I have a child in post-secondary. Every day when she comes home, exhausted, stressed, with tons of schoolwork. Thank God this is the last week of her school year. But what are some ways that you believe the school's faculty or administration can take a major steps to support students' mental health today, and that doesn't require new funding or staff. And obviously, they're also important that what are things that can be done already while things like creating an on-campus resource center get underway?
So I think there's lots that could be done. There's things, we take a whole campus approach in terms of our work, meaning we believe everybody on campus plays a part in creating a mentally a safe environment for students, and everybody's own mental health plays a big part in creating a psychologically safe campus environment, meaning I think everyone from cafeteria staff to faculty to administration.
We'll now move to the official opposition. MPP Sattler, 7.5 minutes.
Very much, Chair, and thank you to both of the presenters for attending the committee today. I want to address my first couple of questions to the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, and I really appreciate your referencing the HECO study that was just released in January of this year. I found it very useful myself when I was reviewing this bill and the financial commitments that were made by the government to support post-secondary students' mental health needs. And certainly the HECO report makes many of the same recommendations that you made today in your presentation, in particular the need to increase funding for institutions to deliver mental health supports for students. Now, the government's bill came with some additional funding. There was $8 million for post-secondary mental health action plan over 3 years, which is $2.7 million per year, 47 post-secondary institutions in the province. I wondered if you could speak perhaps in more detail about what kind of resources do you think are necessary to deliver the kinds of mental health supports that students need, and if you feel that the issue was a lack of policy at institutions instead of funding.
So to answer the second question, that's easy, and it's more the lack of funding. Yeah. So most schools, and I have a list of them in front of me, already have a mental health policy in place, or it's part of a larger policy that they have in place in terms of student well-being, etc. So most of them do have the work. It's if you're going to create a policy, how do you create a policy that you can actually implement? So first, the cost of a policy has to be acknowledged. To create a really fulsome policy where there is student engagement, where there is faculty and staff engagement, is a big cost to schools. So to do it well costs, and then to actually implement those. In terms of what has to happen, it sometimes varies, again, apples to oranges when you're talking a smaller school to a bigger school. But, I tend to reference things like the stepped care framework, which looks at low need, low intervention, high need, high intervention, and having the opportunity for students to also have choice in the type of intervention as they go between those.
Okay, thank you. And you talked about the cost of developing policy and doing the consultation that's necessary to make good policy. Now, this Bill 166, doesn't include any reference to consultation. It's totally ministerial directive in determining content of the policy. Do you think that is that's going to be constructive and positive for students in our post-secondary institutions?
So I'll speak to my knowledge of mental health policies, and for a mental health policy to be truly effective, there has to be significant consultation on that campus, and it can take 1 year to 2 years for a mental health policy that is truly, I would say, embodies the needs of that school to actually come into fruition.
Okay, thank you very much. I now want to turn to Mr. Han from CUPE Ontario, and you represent 30,000 workers in Ontario universities, and I'm sure you are hearing the same thing I am hearing from many of those workers about the chronic staff shortages, that vacancies are not being filled, retirements are not being replaced, incredible workload burdens on staff. What does this mean in terms of staff's ability to deliver the mental health supports that students need in Ontario campuses?
Thanks so much for the question, and I really want to also appreciate my co-presenter for recognizing the importance of everyone on a campus and the entire campus community having the capacity to enjoy positive mental health experiences in their jobs, and the reality, sadly, of too many of our members because of increased workload pressures, because of the fear of contracting out of their work, because of the necessity. Most of our academic members, for example, have to reapply for their jobs, if not every semester, then every year. The precarity that is implied there, the way in which all of these things contribute to stress for those workers means that when taken as a whole, it negatively impacts the capacity of the entire campus community to support a positive mental health outcome for students. Naturally, our members in the work that they engage in, whether they be food service workers, whether they be maintenance and trade workers, whether they be academic workers or library workers at universities, all of them care deeply about the mental health of students, but there is a growing recognition that without sufficient supports for workers, their own mental health suffers, and therefore the collective mental health of the campus community is negatively impacted.
Okay, thank you very much. And you pointed out in your presentation the level of political interference that this bill represents in terms of the workings of our post-secondary campuses with these ministerial dictates as to what is to be in these new policies that will now be required. Can you expand a little bit more about what is lost when institutions don't consult with those 30,000 workers that you represent, when they don't consult with students, when they don't consult with their local communities on what would be an effective mental health policy, what would be an effective anti-hate and racism policy?
I think that, again, my co-presenter has quite eloquently pointed out the ways in which good mental health policies are most effective when they involve deep consultation. I would say the same.
Remaining.
I would say the same thing's true when it comes to combating hate and anti-Indigenous hate, racism, sexism, sexual violence. All of these matters need the university community to come together. What is problematic deeply here is not only that it will result in bad policy, but it also represents a degree of political interference that, quite frankly, no matter who was sitting in government, no matter which party of which political stripe, no politician should be able to have a dictate on these kinds of policies at academic institutions in our province. It is deeply against the entire history of post-secondary institutions and the autonomy that they have achieved in our province, with good reason, and not just here but around the globe. There are real reasons why institutions of higher learning need to be able to decide these issues and questions for themselves within the legal frameworks that already exist in our Human Rights Code and our Occupational Health and Safety Act. Not only is this unnecessary...
we've got the first round of questions. Thank you for the independent member. You've got 4.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My first question is for Canadian Mental Health Association. What I've noticed in mental health in the community, and maybe this you could speak to how this looks on campus, is that because there's a move to make things cheaper, you don't get the same depth, and a lot of those experienced clinicians, because of work precarity, move on, and it makes it very challenging to have high-quality, experienced clinicians, and a lot of turnover. Can you explain what you see in campuses because of this kind of project-based, short-term underfunding?
So, in terms of the level of the number of folks that are leaving campus mental health, there has been a large turnover across the province. I think partly due to the precarious situation they're in terms of funding and salaries. There's also a massive level of burnout. I mean, the last 4 years have been incredibly difficult, both in community and in campus. And there is competition for great staff. And obviously there is sectors that have more funding to be able to take on those staff.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for mentioning burnout. Do you see anything in this bill that addresses the burnout of the mental health staff?
Again, I would say no, because it talks about things at a very high level, but a good mental health strategy will look at, again, a whole campus approach to mental health.
So you're hopeful that there will be consultation of the people delivering mental health services going forward?
Again, in terms of the creation of a proper mental health strategy, it would look to consult and engage everyone on campus, including staff.
Thank you. My next question is for QP, our rep from QP. Thank you. Sorry, I'm bad with names. You talk a lot about this reach. Have some of your staff members commented on what the impact could be on their work with this jurisdictional creep, I guess?
In advance of coming to present, one of the processes we have inside is to talk specifically to those workers elected to represent the sector and in our locals in the sector, particularly in this case, some of the academic locals, but certainly even our service and support locals have real concerns about the way in which what this bill would facilitate and allow is, again, unprecedented. In the history of post-secondary education in Ontario, and there are real concerns about the way in which this would not understand and respect the work that is already underway in various campuses, some of which our members in those locals have been deeply engaged in, and it's why I'm here today. They asked me to come on their behalf to represent the concerns that they've expressed to me.
I guess I'm worried at a time of like major fiscal difficulties that we could be reinventing a wheel that exists, and maybe we could make the wheel worse, or we could make the wheel better in some cases. But what is your hope for institutions?
There's
maybe
about
I'll
1
ask
minute remaining.
QP, on how this won't interfere with good work that's already happening if it exists.
I think the only way to ensure that this doesn't interfere with good work that's already underway or has happened is for the government to withdraw the legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. How do you feel about that?
Again, in terms of mental health policy, I think that the policy is only worth the engagement that it's built on. And so anyone could create a policy. You could sort of, print out a policy tomorrow. But if you want a true mental health policy, there has to be work and engagement built in.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, we'll move to the government's 7.5 minutes. MPP Pang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for you again to CICMH. So as we talked earlier that this is the last week of the school year. So I believe a lot of students may need to deal with a challenge when they are leaving the campus this week. So when they have mental health concerns but cannot be able to access them when they go home for holidays or over the summer. So can you talk a bit about how we might be able to bridge the gap?
So in terms of students over the course of the summer, I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of students are actually going to school throughout the school year. So there are numerous schools that are running their programs all the way through the summer months, which again creates further burden on the schools in terms of finances. And other schools, when they return home for the summer, will be accessing community mental health services. And as everybody in the room knows, community mental health is also very, very stretched right now.
So how do they assess those type of services through the school campus? Because they may not know about what the service can the community provide locally.
So many of the campuses do provide a linkage into the community. So one of the things we've been doing is really looking at creating bridges between campuses and community mental health, such as CMHAs across the province, but also connecting them to supports that might be available in their home town during the summer months. So most of the counselors will also be supporting students in connecting them with supports over the course of those 3 or 4 months that they may not be on campus.
So would there be a discontinuity
There would be. There's also waiting lists. So just because you need the service and you've gone home to the community, there may be such a significant waiting list that you don't access it over the course of the summer.
MPP Pierre.
Thank you. And my question is for Maria. So I was just looking at the campus mental health website and just really wanted to thank you for all the work that you have done and looking at all the toolkits and resources that you've developed for the sector. And you talked previously about, each college and university having their own set of policies, and everyone's kind of at a different place in the development of their policies. So just curious about your thoughts on, best practices and sharing resources, and if that's, I look at the toolkits and the resources on your website, and I think how valuable those tools are, not only for the student wellness centers, but for students, for employees, for faculty members. And just was curious about your thoughts on the best ways to collaborate, work together. How can we kind of share those resources so that everyone's not doing something differently? We don't have to start all over every time. We can look at what's working really well, and then adopt and spread across the sector. So your thoughts?
And that's much of the work of the center. So we actually, through our toolkits, make recommendations on topics such as supporting 2S LGBTQ plus students, such as anti-oppressive practice. So it's all outlined there. We also create forums through our communities of practice where schools can come together and share best practices and learn from each other. And we do the heavy lifting in terms of also finding those materials from them as well.
Okay. And then I guess, so Bill 166, if it passes and a directive is created on mental health, what are, the top three things that you would like to see mentioned, outlined, and implemented?
So I would say number one is engagement. So a fulsome mental health policy should be based on engagement. I also have to address the fact that mental health policy should not only fall on the wellness department. So a true mental health policy will be reflective of all policies on campus. So everything from how we register, et cetera, will have an impact on mental health. And the third piece is I think we need to ensure in this realm, in a mental health policy, that we're looking at intersectionality. So as I came in, the Student Federation was speaking, students are facing many issues around things like food insecurity, around housing insecurity. All of those also impact their mental health. So again, any mental health policy should also be looking at intersectionality.
Okay. How much time do we have left?
You have 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
Okay. So I guess another question, something that I spend some time thinking about is we have students that are leaving high school, and understanding that not all post-secondary students are 18 years old. We have a lot of mature learners, a lot of second career students, a lot of people who are newcomers to Canada who may be participating, taking courses at their local post-secondary institute. But for the young students, so those who are leaving high school and then transitioning to post-secondary, for a lot of them it's their first time, living away from mom and dad, and now they're, not only entering a very academically intense environment, but there are other pressures, feeding yourself, getting along with roommates, a lot of new stresses that are introduced. So just wondering if you have any thoughts on proactive measures that we can take to kind of maybe help bridge the gap for those younger students, things that we can do to support them, because so many families, it's almost like you're at home, you're part of this nurturing family, and then all of a sudden when you leave and go to school, you're expected to handle it all. So
1 minute.
And I'm smiling because most of what you mentioned we have a resource for. So everything from how to get along with your roommate. And we've also developed tools for that transition from high school into university, college, and or Indigenous Institute. So there are pieces that we have created. And a lot of it comes down to also ensuring that we work with the secondary schools so that some of that is also built in to the last year of secondary school.
Okay. Do you track any data or information on the number of people that are accessing your resources? Or
We do. I can tell you, just because I finished our year end, between our two websites, we were over 100,000 users last year.
Excellent. Now, do you know who those users are?
I can say high level in terms of like province, in terms of, but I can't tell you in terms of profession, no.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, are they, or is it students driving
Thanks
traffic to
to
your
the
website?
government for
we
this,
can't-
this round. So we've got the final round of questioning for the official opposition. MPP Wong Tam, you have 7.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to you both for your presentations. Very informative day so far. My first question would be for you, Ms. Padgen. I am just very interested in knowing your organization as it sits within the campus, I guess the Post-Secondary Institute ecosystem. You are in contact with colleges, universities, undergraduate students, and the College Students Alliance. That's pretty much everyone in that space that operates there. I'm just curious, because this bill, as it sits before us, specifically deals with mental health and instructions to all PSIs that they're to go forth and develop a mental health policy. Was your organization or any of the other organizations consulted or at least informed that this was coming?
I can't speak to the other organizations. I myself was not.
Okay. And I'm just also curious to know, because consultation is very important in developing any type of policy that needs to have sort of broad buy-in. You want to know what your audience is interested in, so you can therefore tailor the policy to meet their needs. With respect to the challenges that post-secondary students are facing, especially when it comes to mental health, depression, anxiety, what is my understanding is that one of the top reasons why they're feeling so stressed out, if I would just use this very informally, is just the financial stress and burden that they're facing. Has that been your experience as well?
I don't know if I can say it's the top one, but it's definitely up high. I think there's many other factors that would lead to stress and anxiety among students, but 100% we hear more and more about financial strain, and in particular around food insecurity. That has been a very hot topic on campus.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that many of the campuses now are actually operating food banks, both for their students, but also for their teaching assistants and sometimes for contract faculty. And so I'm also aware, as informed, as told to me by the Canadian Federation of Students recently, is that the students are finding it increasingly difficult to access services because of the long wait list. Has that been your experience with your students?
There has been a long wait list for services across. I think there's been I'm going to phrase it not even just around wait list, but there's a huge strain, right? More and more students, the numbers are not going down in terms of the need. So over the last few years, I've been with the Centre for 6 years. Year over year, we're seeing more and more students who are identifying themselves as having mental health concerns.
Right. And you can't really learn or do well in school when you're so burdened with mental health issues. Would that
it
be
will
a fair
definitely
assessment?
have an impact on learning and retention, yeah.
The Mental Health Commission of Canada, and I just happened to be on their website, has a national standard for mental health and well-being for post-secondary students. So this is a policy that reaches every single province and territory, I believe.
So I sat on the technical committee for that.
great.
It's not a policy,
Okay.
it's a standard.
The
So
standard.
there is these finite little differences between a standard and a policy. But yes, the Mental Health Commission put that out in 2020.
And that would apply to Ontario, would it not?
It applies to all schools, and many schools are actually adopting it.
And is that why, out of the 47 post-secondary institutions, the majority of them have a mental health policy in some form?
I would say
already?
that has influenced it, but I would say that even prior to that, many schools were already beginning to do the work.
Okay. So really what's missing in this bill is actually resources and funding in order for the post-secondary institutions to be able to resource the mental health supports on campus to support the students.
That is a big need.
Okay, thank you. My next set of questions is for Mr. Han. Always nice to see you. I'm really curious about what you had to say about the fact that you raised some concerns about perhaps government overreach. that it could be dangerous and chilling. You did also reference the fact that we have some policies in place already, namely the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Ontario Human Rights Code. And as I sort of did a quick scan of universities and what they had sitting on their websites, it looked, again, like most of them are following the OHRC as well as the OHSA. Is there anything else that's needed at the university level when it comes to addressing hate and in particular anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and every form of hate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those frameworks, the Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Code, and the Occupational Health and Safety Act are like the frames. And many institutions have been very busy filling in the picture and working on mechanisms to actually deal with these matters, right? Both of those pieces of legislation tend to deal with complaints. What we're trying to do here is root out the problem before it gets to a complaint, right? Actually helping people to understand the ways in which, for example, white supremacy, colonialism, anti-LGBTQ, sentiment is worked into our society. And so there's a great deal of work that's been done, and it's why it's so problematic that any government concerning itself with many other things might think that it was sufficiently connected, that it could direct what should happen on university campuses when there are already people there doing that work in really important ways.
Thank you. And as I, again, scan the university websites on how they deal with complaints, most of them are saying, stand up and say something, report it if you see something, or contact the police, or we'll do it for you. I think I recognize that that's very reactionary. By that time, the harm is already done. People are already feeling the hurt and perhaps a sense of not being safe. The Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, very great outlet. It's a great title. But Mr. Han, I recognize that they actually put forth a recommendation.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you, sir. That they put forth a recommendation that I think that I'd like to get you to comment on. And that recommendation is to help fund the current initiatives and student services in place to address hate speech, harassment, and discrimination. Would you say that that is a good way for the government to support PSIs in addressing safer campus environments?
Yes, none of this will happen magically. It all requires funding and attention, particularly of student services and some of those important, often unseen services on campuses that actually help to solidify the university community.
And final question to you both. How successful will policy be, or this legislation be, without deep engagement and conversation with the sector?
It would not be successful at all.
Agreed. There needs to be deep consultation and engagement.
Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you. We'll now move to the final round of questioning with the independent member. You've got your 4.5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I'm a social worker. I come from the secondary school and elementary school level, so I have a deep understanding. It's recent that I left, so I do see how much the needs have grown, especially related to social anxiety and kids, young people facing panic attacks and increase in that area. So yeah, I guess one of the main things I notice is that young people disconnect and they isolate often. And that puts a lot of negative impact on their overall perspective. So I guess one of the questions I have is earlier some of our reports have shared that there's been an 11% increase in the number of students in Ontario colleges and universities, and at least for the colleges, they said since the 10% cut and the freezing of tuition funding has gone down 30%. When you think about all the activities on a school campus and how much the needs have grown and how much the resources have lessened, sorry, Maria? Okay. What do you think about the overall picture or life of students? I know I'm wandering a little bit, but mental health is so much more than just a counselor for one visit, but it's their whole lives, right? So how do you see us doing better to weave mental health supports into the different aspects of student life?
So again, a mental health policy would go beyond just the counseling department. It would look at everything on campus, from how housing looks to really more upstream mental health intervention, so more of the promotion. So, why are students isolated? To me, the question is, what are we doing earlier on in the course? What are we doing earlier on when they arrive on campus, rather than when we're waiting for them already to be in crisis and then searching and seeking support? So it's ensuring some of the more upstream pieces are in hand as well.
And what do you think is needed to make sure you can get to be proactive?
For students to be proactive?
For the schools to be proactive in ensuring well-being?
So I think it's, again, taking a whole campus approach and making sure that it doesn't fall just under the wellness department. It's that everyone on campus should be playing a part. So how residences are set up, residence dons, cafeteria workers. I mean, the cafeteria workers are the ones that are going to notice a change in a student before anyone else. So again, everybody plays a part in creating a safe environment for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the training I got went beyond about how do we connect with every member of the school system to make sure. And that's where I do want to respond to MPP Smith's. I was a business student, and I was hopeful that I would get an ethics class. So I got a quarter credit, and I think our economy would be different if we understood the impact of the business decisions we made on all aspects of life. I did want to follow up on, for Mr. Hahn, if you could share a little bit about what your stakeholders are sharing about how the impact is on this funding shortage on their work.
Yeah, I think it plays out in different ways for different kinds of work that our members do on campuses, often for food service workers and custodial and maintenance workers, tradespeople. There's a difficulty in retaining and attracting people to the work. Therefore, workloads grow. That grows on stress. With the academic workers, the very precarious nature of the work, that they have to reapply for their jobs every 6 to 12 months, and that they're paid only for a small portion of the work they actually do, means that they have to stitch together a series of jobs across a series of institutions. All of this adds to the stress for the work that they do, and it's quite remarkable. At York University, a university that just completed a work stoppage, a strike there, 50% of the instruction was done by workers, most of whom are all precarious, all part-time, all stitching together jobs at several institutions, and yet they do the bulk of teaching at that institution.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it. A little ahead of time because we had two presenters, so in all fairness to the group that's not here, we'll have a short recess until the advertised time of 4 o'clock when we'll continue our proceedings.